Hey everybody, it's me, Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to be talking about a band called Rankin. Actually, I'm going to be talking about more than a band called Rank and File. And you will soon discover that Chip and Tony Kinman, the two main guys behind Rank and File, actually were involved in a lot more than just that band. And I'm going to discuss them here. But let's go back a little bit, because Chip and Tony Kinman were originally part of a punk band called the Dils. Now, they had started in Texas, and they moved to the West Coast, the Bay Area, and they started the Dils. I'm going to show you a CD here, but in 1977, the Dils released their first single, which was called 198 Seconds of the Dils in 1977. Then they put out a single called I Hate the Rich that same year. Then they disappeared for a few years, and they didn't put out anything again until 1980 when they released the EP called Made in Canada, which was 3 tracks, which found them much more melodic, less edgy punk, but 3 really, really good tunes. But that was it for the band. And most of that stuff is featured here. Now, not the Class War single, which is a bummer, which means I have to track down a different Dill CD. There's various Dill CDs. They have their studio recordings, plus a lot of live recordings. But I'm not particularly into raw live recordings, but I do love the Dils studio recordings. But definitely check out the Dils if you're into the late 70s punk, because they are some really great songs. A very unique sound to them too, like I said, melodic, and it was really showcasing Chip and Tony Kinman's talents in its infancy. But Chip and Tony, they got together with a guitar player by the name of Alejandro Escovedo, and they formed Rank and File. And Rank and File released their debut album in 1982. That's Sundown. It's very heavy country. It's more 50s and early 60s Johnny Cash than it is Kenny Rogers or Charlie Rich in the 70s. You know, it's nothing like that. And boy, it just jam-packed. Amanda Ruth was the big song off of this record. And it was obvious that the Kinman brothers were really talented. You got Chip with his higher tenor voice, and he was on guitar. And then Tony with his baritone voice, sometimes just dipping down into bass, and he played the bass as well. And of course, Alejandro Escovedo was the guitar player on Sundown. It's a great record. You know, Amanda Ruth, The Conductor Wore Black, the song Rank and File, lots of great songs on that album. Now, by the time Long Gone Dead came out in 1984, Escovedo had left the band, and the album still very much rooted in that, you know, country, punk, new wave, whatever you want to call it, you know, very country, but it was much more polished, I guess you could say. Poppier is another word. Like the title track, Long Gone Dead, is wonderful. Sound of the Rain is another song that's fantastic, and it was actually a Dill song from that Made in Canada EP. It seemed like on this record they were focusing a little bit more on Chip's vocals, because he was the more poppier vocalist, maybe the more radio friendly. But I consider it just a great collection of songs. You know, I love both albums, and you know, I recommend them both. Now, I haven't shown a CD yet. What I want to tell you is that those did come out individually. I think Collector's Choice put them out, but originally Rhino Handmade put out something called the Slash Years, which featured both of those albums plus 4 bonus tracks. Wounded Bird later reissued it, and there you go there. And the 4 bonus tracks, I think, were either cassette only or non-album B-sides. Not sure, but there is 4 bonus tracks on this Rank and File, the Slash Year CD. Definitely recommended, because they were a very unique band. Now, it took another 3 years before the band returned with a self-titled album, but by this time, it was a whole different ballgame. Now, they were writing songs that were very similar to the first 2 albums, you know, in structure, but instead of having a country feel, it was really a trebly alternative rock sound. And in fact, if you can see there, they definitely don't look like the country influenced kids of old. And like I said about the songs, you know, the first time I heard this, I admit, I was like, what the heck happened? I mean, I went back to the album and I totally heard that this was really a transition record from, you know, the old Rank and File to music that they were going to be doing in the future. You know, that Kinman songwriting style was just wrapped up in different clothes. No longer were they country sounding, but the songwriting was still very much similar to the first 2 albums. And of course, you know, the press really wasn't too kind to it, because they had changed so drastically between Long Gone Dead and the self-titled album. That came out in 1987, and by that time, I believe the band had broken up. And Chip and Tony Kinman went on to form a band called Blackbird. And this came out in 1987, and this was their debut EP. and it is a completely different ball of wax. There was a few songs on this album that used programmed drums and some keyboards in the background, but here they went full bore, programmed drums, keyboards, and like a lot of distorted guitar, sounding very much like dream pop or shoegaze before all that stuff became popular. But it was also very avant-garde, very experimental. This is an EP that came out. It was just called Blackbird. This is a shock to the system if you only heard them with the first two Rank and File albums. But if you already knew that they were in a punk band called the Dils, and then they were in a country band called Rank and File, well, it's not that much of a surprise that they're trying something different and something new. There's still melodies in there, but sometimes the experimental avant-garde sort of takes over a little bit. But I remained a fan of the Kinman brothers because they were doing something different, something new. Music started catching up a little bit later when shoegaze and dream pop and noise rock came more in vogue. Well, in 1989, they released an album called Blackbird. So this is their second release under the name Blackbird. Now, that particular album did not come out on CD, but this CD came out, and this is kind of a compilation of songs from the EP I just showed you and songs from that Blackbird album. So you can track that down. And again, still doing that experimental mixture of, these effects, heavy guitars, some keyboards, programmed drums, nice melodies, but you need to get into it with repeated listenings. Still very much worth your while. In 1992, Blackbird returned with the album Blackbird, their third release called Blackbird. And this one was on Scotty Brothers. And this is actually a redefining of their sound. They were still playing the same kind of music, but it was much more commercial. They toned down the experimental parts and the droney parts and the loud parts, but it was still very unique. And the melodies were really just jumping out at you. And this just pointed in a whole new direction that was really, really exciting. Now, this particular version here, that's either Chip and Tony's autographs on the album, both here and here, or somebody was testing out their Sharpie marker to make sure it worked. So maybe a viewer out there can let me know. But this I actually really loved. I mean, I really like the previous two CDs I showed you by Blackbird, but this is one that I played a lot, and tracks from this made a lot of compilations that I put together. But unfortunately, after that album, Blackbird were done, and the Kinman brothers moved on to a brand new project called Cowboy Nation. Now, their first album came out in 1996. This is a reissue of the album. The original album was called Cowboy Nation, but the reissue is called We Do As We Please. And this is returning back to that country sound of Rank and File, but it's not alternative country. It's cowboy music. I mean, the songs are cowboy songs. These are mostly written by Chip and Tony, to my knowledge, but lyrically, these songs were born of the Wild West, and it's really actually fascinating and wonderful. It's like stripping down Rank and File musically and just taking it to its core, kind of like if the Velvet Underground had been around in the Wild West. But it's really wonderful. In fact, Tony's baritone voice sounds great. Chip's harmonies, it's raw, but it's also warm. It's sitting around the campfire and listening to some great tunes. And it's definitely just a fantastic album. If you were a fan of Rank and File but didn't care for Blackbird, just check out Cowboy Nation, because it's the Kinman brothers just putting together a great batch of songs. Cowboy Nation returned with a second album. This came out in the year 2000. It's called A Journey Out of Time. Another great collection of songs. I love the version of Shenandoah on this, and just a great collection of songs. The thing is even throughout all the changes that the Kinman brothers were going through musically, they still had a very distinctive sound. So when you listen to Blackbird, you go, that's Chip and Tony. When you listen to Cowboy Nation, when you listen to Rank and File, the Dils, they had a unique sound, even though it all sounded completely different. This is the third and final Cowboy Nation album. It's called Cowgirl A Go-Go. Came out in 2002. Another great collection of songs. I can't recommend the Cowboy Nation stuff enough. I mean, of course, the first two Rank and File albums are the ones that just, if you need to check anything out from this video, check those out. But Cowboy Nation, close second because the songs are absolutely fantastic. Now, unfortunately, there was no more music released by the brothers that I know of. And unfortunately, Tony Kinman passed away in 2018. However, his brother Chip formed a band called Ford Maddox Ford, and they put out an album in 2018. I think it's called This American Blues or something to that effect. And Chip has also put out a very experimental album on his own. I think that may have come out in 2020. But one more CD I want to show you. This came out on Omnivore. It was 2019, and it's called Sounds Like Music, and it's Chip and Tony Kinman. And what this does, it compiles pretty much all unreleased tracks by the bands I just talked about: the Dils, Rank and File, Blackbird, and Cowboy Nation. And it's just a great mix there. Now, a lot of it's raw, rare demos, things like that, but it's a great alternative look into the career of Chip and Tony Kinman. Really wonderful stuff. You should definitely check out all this music. You know what? I know that some of you go, I haven't heard of any of those bands. Well, guess what? I've put together a medley featuring very short sound bites from practically every CD that I showed you here. But you're going to hear the Dils, you're going to hear Rank and File, Blackbird, and you're going to hear Cowboy Nation. Sit back, give this a listen, and I'll see you on the other side.
From the dry, let the dry, it's getting hot. I need water.
I don't listen to the cops, they talk with wood and lead. Listen to the planes flying overhead. Listen to the sound of the lost and gained. I just listen to the sound of the rain.
Listen, laughing now. You find out somehow. Baby's got a black book. Your baby's got a black book. Say baby's got a black book. She's got a black book too. Golden age, golden age, golden age, golden age. Memory creates a golden age. Only sing about the good time. Highway blues and the rhythm of the train. Yes, I will sing. killing your soldiers below. People wherever they go will remember the Alamo. Cowboy, cowboy nation, get on your pony and ride. Put another log on the fire, try to keep the weather outside. You know trouble's gonna find you no matter how hard you ride. Shannon, I long to hear you away. I'm bound away. 2 miles to town, 2 miles to town. Yippee, 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 2 miles to town, 2 miles to town. They're gonna tear it up all the way. 2 miles to town, 2 miles to town. Yippee, 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 2 miles to town. Well, it's alright, catch the train. I'll get my rebel back again. If it takes all night, catch the train. I'll get my rebel back again. Day after day, after day, after day, I ride the West. I did my best. I'm on my last ride home.
Anyway, that's it. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. I hope it inspires you to check out any of the bands that I talked about. Thank you, everybody. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, to ring that bell for future notifications. And until the next time, remember me. I'm Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie.